When you meditate, how long does it take you to kind of get into a state of like, well, I don't know, to get out of your mind and all that?
Sometimes it takes like 2 seconds, and other times it takes like 2 hours. And other times I don't even get there that day.
Well,
this is actually a big question, and I'm not sure if you want me to answer this now, but as human beings, we're used to letting our minds take the lead, and we get into spirituality, and we get into spiritual practices, and religious practices, shamanic practices, everything in our lives, really. We get into it through the mind taking the lead. We formulate ideas, and we follow those ideas, and we make decisions mentally about what to do. That's kind of the normal process of life. But I've discovered in myself, at least, that if I really want to make progress, I have to turn this process on its head. And I have to stop letting the mind dictate what I do in my spiritual practice, particularly in meditation. And so this is why I talk about surrender so much on the blog. Because if you want to get out of your human box, then you can't let the mind lead the way. You have to surrender to something greater than yourself. You have to surrender to your soul. And so in a completely surrendered state, there is no right or wrong. There is no right way to meditate. There is no wrong way to meditate. There are no goals. There are no caveats. There are no hang-ups. Everything just is. All judgment stops. As soon as thought stops, then judgment stops. And when I say thought, what I really mean is when you surrender, you may still have your internal dialogue going on, but you've handed the reins of your consciousness over to your soul, and your mind no longer has the reins. And that stops judgment. And as soon as judgment stops, then progress can begin. Real progress can begin. And so this is what Christ meant. And I'm not Christian, by the way, but I do have great respect for his teachings. This is what Christ meant when he said, "Whosoever giveth up their life shall save it." It has nothing to do with anything external. It's only about an internal shift. And so this is what I call surrender. If you surrender everything in your human consciousness that you could call a part of your reality to your soul or to God or whatever you perceive the divine to be, it doesn't matter. The divine doesn't care what you call it. If you surrender everything inside of yourself, then that is, quote, giving up your life. You give up your idea of yourself, of what you think you are, of what you think life is. You give up everything. You hand the reins over to Spirit, over to the divine, over to God, over to Allah, over to Buddha, Krishna, Babaji, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what faith you are, doesn't matter what belief system you have. If you're spiritual, non-religious, very religious, shamanic, doesn't matter. Our experience of the divine in a state of surrender is the same. It's the same for every human being on earth. And And so for me, the state of surrender is the path of surrender, and that is the one true path. It's the only path. It's the path of the soul. And so surrender starts, judgment stops, and then suddenly you don't need to ask any more questions like you just asked me. How long does it take you to get to a particular state of meditation? Am I doing it right? How should you sit? On and on and on and on, thousands of questions. All those questions just go away in the state of surrender. And the endless dialogue can finally kind of die out on its own naturally. All of the endless questions can die out because you realize that you have a master teacher already sitting there right in front of you, and that is your own soul. And as soon as your ego, your mind, becomes willing to truly surrender, which does take practice, it does take discipline and practice to get to the point where you really can surrender and let go of deeper levels of yourself that are still holding on. But once you get to a state of surrender, then you can feel your own soul. You can feel the divine. You can feel God. And then you've found the path. Then you've found the way. And you don't need anything else. And then very slowly, as the years of meditation pass, the divine energy, whatever you consider that to be, doesn't matter. The divine energy will slowly transform you, cell by cell, emotion by emotion, thought by thought, into a reflection of itself. It'll turn you into something divine. And if we can all do that, or if we can all get even 2% of the way there, then we suddenly have nirvana on this earth. And we don't have any more problems like we do now.
Wow, cool. That was really cool. So I just sat there and just focused on my breath. And I was listening to what you were saying, but I was just keeping my attention on my breath. And it was like there was a synchronicity happening between your voice and my thoughts. It was like my consciousness was suddenly blending with something bigger.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a trick of my mind because I'm wearing these cool headphones and hearing your voice, and I was sitting here peacefully. Maybe it's just a trick of the psyche, but that was a very cool experience.
Well, I was meditating last night, and something interesting came to me because I was imagining questions that might be asked of me in interviews. And one of the questions was, how do you determine if your meditative experiences or visions are real, or if they're just your imagination? Because I've seen Jesus in meditation. He's appeared in my third eye. And so because of this reason, I would tell people that he's a real person. He did exist. Whether or not his story has been manipulated and how much has been manipulated, setting that issue aside, in my opinion, he was a real person because I've seen him. And his grace and energy are just fantastic. I mean, it's one of the brightest beings I've ever seen. And so... Having said that, why would anybody believe me or what they have experienced in meditation. How do you discern between a false experience or just your imagination and something real?
Right.
And
That's
yeah.
It's funny that you thought of that question, because I've been for days just thinking of all the questions I would ask you, and that was like the main question: is how do I know if when I see something in meditation whether my mind is just doing something, or if I'm having an experience that comes from outside of my mind. I should say brain. I'm going to replace that word because I mean brain when I say that. So.
Well, the mind and the brain and the difference between the two is a whole nother topic that gets quite interesting. So I'll put that aside for a moment. But, basically we've been synced since we set the intent to do this talk.
Right.
So we've been synced for days.
I've been feeling it too.
Yeah. So, this is a very difficult question. The answer that I came up with for myself is that I know that what I saw when I saw Jesus and when I've seen many other things, I know that what I saw was real because of how it felt. Because imagination is akin to dreams, for example. When you imagine something really vividly, you feel it, and it feels kind of real. And when you dream something, it can feel very real. But then when you come back to regular awareness, if you were to rate the feeling of that dream or vivid imagining, and on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is what we're experiencing in our normal awareness in the regular physical world, as we call it. If you were to rate the realness of those experiences, then I would rate my dreams and vivid imagining somewhere probably in the range of like a 4 to a 7.
Okay.
Depending on how intense they get. I wouldn't really rate it ever as a 10. Because there's something in us that can discern that can tell the difference. But when I've had these experiences in meditation, I would say that they're an 11 or a 12. They feel more real to me than the physical reality does.
Wow.
And that's one of the things about meditation that can be, on the one hand, very disconcerting for people, and on the other hand, that's what pulls us deeper into meditation and makes meditation so interesting. Because after you get past the kind of introductory phase of meditation, which takes, a few months to a few years, depending on the person and how often you meditate, once the introductory phase is passed, then you start to experience these very profound things in meditation that go way deeper than your normal earthly experience in just the normal physical realm. And at a certain point, you reach a crossroads. And the crossroads is, which world is real? Is my meditative world real, or is the physical world real? And the answer is, it depends on your perspective. If you're alive in a physical body, then the physical world is also real to you. But after you die, the physical world just seems like a dream. And so if you think of atoms as pure energy, then we're basically in a hologram right now in this physical world. So is the hologram real, or is it just a hologram? Well, it depends on how you feel about it.
Wow.
It depends on your perspective.
But are our feelings part of the hologram? Are feelings holographic?
No. They're not.
So our feeling is kind of like that's our connection into the hologram, or what is a feeling?
I would say what you feel is the only thing in this world that is truly real. And so our feelings come from our aura. And our aura, our mind exists in the aura. Our mind is what Don Juan Matus of Carlos Castaneda's books called the assemblage point. That's our mind. The assemblage point is the mind. And we have layers in the aura for emotion, for the health of the physical body, for thought, the mental layers. We have spiritual layers, which generate all of the spiritual experiences that we could have. And all of these energies in the aura are electromagnetically wired into the physical body through the nervous system. And so we're basically a pure energy being that is electromagnetically wired into a physical body and driving it around on the earth.
Wow.
And that's how the whole thing works. And we think that we're physical, but we're only physical as long as the body's alive. And we have very short lifetimes. We live just for several decades and that's it. It's a very short period of time. And we spend far longer in the non-physical realms than we do the physical. Physical life is very short.
So is there a time span for the spiritual life?
It's basically whatever we decide it to be. It depends on how much progress we decide we want to make in this universe, because we co-created this universe together. Our souls did. That's my opinion. And opinions vary, and there's no way that anybody can prove the final answer to themselves or to anybody else. So it's just anybody's opinion, what they think, what they feel, what they see in meditation. But what my personal opinion and experience is that we co-created this universe together, and so the time span of this universe depends on how much we decide to accomplish. That's it. It's kind of like you're not forced to reincarnate over and over and over and over and over again on the earth for thousands and thousands of years until you become an ascended master. You don't have to do that. Most souls which come to earth don't do that. They come here for a particular period of time, and then they decide, okay, I think I'm done here, then they move on to the next place. So this universe is a divine experiment that we're creating from a divine perspective.
And is time a construct that's just special to this creation?
If you imagine a frequency wave, like a sine wave, as you go up in the dimensions, that wave gets faster and faster. Or from your perspective, it gets faster and faster. So the distance between the peaks and the valleys of the wave gets shorter and shorter. And so if you were to continue to go up in frequency until you reach the divine frequency, the frequency of our souls, then the wave would become a solid line. There would be no distance between the peaks and the valleys of the wave. It would turn into a line. And so from the soul's perspective, this entire universe is just a snap of a finger. It's just a blip in time. And so it's like we've created this bubble that has popped into being, and then before it disappears, we've sent our own consciousness into the bubble, and we've sent our consciousness to lower and lower and lower frequencies within the bubble that is the multiverse. And because we're lowering the frequency of our experience, we start to experience what we call time. But for our souls, time doesn't exist. Everything is instantaneous.
So was time something we created to experience this world in like a linear fashion by creating time? Or
you could say that. I'd say that time is an effect of the creation. It's a property of the creation. And by the way, when quantum physicists talk about different dimensions, they're talking about spatial dimensions. When spiritual people like me talk about dimensions, we're talking about a dimension as a frequency range of experience. So every dimension is a frequency range.
Let's get into that, because I'm not totally clear. So a frequency range would be like yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. How do you define a dimension?
Let me talk about atoms a little bit more first. And then I'll get into what a dimension is, because one explanation is based on the other. What I've seen in meditation, which is subjective, it's not objective. Any intuitive information that you receive in meditation and channeling and just regular intuition, intuitive or psychic hits that you get during the day, it's all subjective information. It's all filtered through all of the layers of the aura. So I'm not claiming to be right, but what I see in meditation is that atoms are actually just vortexes, meaning that there are no particles. And different atomic weights on the periodic table of elements are created by different rotational speeds of the atomic vortexes. And so the faster the atom is spinning, the deeper the dimple it creates in space-time, in the fabric of space-time. And what physicists are perceiving in their experiments when they smash atoms together in the particle accelerators, what they're perceiving as subatomic particles actually are just kind of interactions and resonances that are created when atomic vortexes are destroyed, and they're kind of spinning out of existence and interacting with other atomic vortexes around them. That's what subatomic particles actually are.
I can picture that, like when you've got a whirlpool in water, and then you disrupt it, sometimes it separates into several smaller whirlpools, and then those fade away.
Yeah, that's a great example, yeah. So that's what's happening, and that's why when quantum physicists look at subatomic particles and what they call the quantum field reality, sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there. And you start to read about quantum theories, and you read things like, well, the universe is still here because it decided to be here still, And that's because from their point of view, the subatomic quantum reality is not stable. It could disappear at any moment from their perspective. And that's because they're looking for particles, they're looking for something solid, and they're not finding it. Because there are no particles, there is nothing solid. An atom is just a vortex. And let me throw in another wrinkle in there. Every time the atomic vortex spins, it pulses like a heartbeat. And as it spins around, it loses energy. And just before it pulses again, it disappears. It blips out of existence. And then something that is creating this reality, the divine, or, the void, whatever you want to call it, something causes that atomic vortex to flare into life again. So it pulses into existence again, and then disappears again, and then pulses into existence again. And so reality is literally going in and out of existence millions of times per second.
Wow.
And that's why when you raise your frequency enough to be able to see energy directly, which many shamans and yogis and monks have experienced. When you see energy directly, it shimmers. Reality starts to shimmer when you're at that level of perception. Because reality is actually just a hologram. It's appearing and disappearing millions of times per second.
I've had this experience a couple of times. The first time I had it was when so I was on ecstasy at a party, and it was the first time I had taken ecstasy, but it all just happened in the flow, with friends, and I was in a new town, and it was New Year's, and I wind up at this house, and someone just hands me this pill, and I just take it, and when it kicked in, I felt it on every level, a shimmering, shining static. It was like a static, but an excited static. And it was everywhere. And that's exactly what you're saying. It's like every single particle was popping. Mm-hmm. Billions and trillions of particles all around me just popping. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly what you were saying. And there was another time I was in a training, and it's called impact training, but essentially in the training, everyone learns to raise their vibration. And at a certain point in the training, we had just gone through this very intense experience, all of us together. And we go into another room to have like a banquet. So we all start eating, and we were totally famished. So we're all eating and socializing. And then that, again, I felt that static where it felt like the whole world was just like sizzling. And, so I get exactly what you mean. I've seen that on several occasions, and it is a matter of my state of being to be aware of it. And I realize it's happening all the time, but there's times when my vibration raises enough that I'm aware of it.
I remember I was sitting in the choir room in high school, I think when I was about 16. I think it was my first year of high school. And I just started reading Carlos Castaneda's books. And when I started reading those books, my mind was just blown open. It was just wide open. And I started
Who's the author again?
Carlos Castaneda.
Okay.
He's fairly well known, yeah.
I've never heard of him, but I'll look him up later.
I started my journey with the book The Road Less Traveled. And I should know the author, but I can't remember it at this second. But I read that book when I was 12, and that kind of started my spiritual journey. Then I moved on to Carlos Castaneda when I was 16, and then that just blew my mind wide open. And so I was sitting in the choir room, and I started to think about what Don Juan Matus had said about seeing energy. And I entered into this really, really relaxed state. And I suddenly started seeing all these little balls of energy just raining down everywhere. Just, millions and millions and millions of them, balls of energy. And they were bouncing off of everything like ping pong balls. And I started to experience such profound joy in that moment. It was just so joyful that I started to laugh, and then I lost the vision. But that was my first experience with seeing kind of the quantum field reality that creates this reality. And a lot of people have seen those little balls that bounce off of everything. And a lot of people have seen many other visions. There's another one that's really common, where it looks like little white worms of energy are everywhere around you. And the higher frequency you get, the more little energy worms are around you. And they're kind of like wiggling and appearing and disappearing. And they're just everywhere. There's just thousands and thousands and thousands of them. If you run really, really hard, if you like sprint and then stop and you're breathing really hard and you look up at the sky on a sunny, clear day, then sometimes you can see those little worms of energy all around in the sky. And the vision will last for just a few seconds, and then you'll go back to your normal awareness.
I feel like I've seen that before, but I always felt like it was just a trick of my eye.
Right.
Light playing on my retina somehow.
Yeah, yep. So at first you see the vision of energy, whether it be the little white worms of light or the little ping pong balls bouncing off of everything. And then you start to feel the energy of it. And the feeling of the experience becomes more important than the visuals of the experience. And then it lifts you into what the Hindu calls samadhi. And for me, that's how I know that the vision that I'm having is real. It's from the feeling. Because dreams and imagination don't feel that real. And that's the only way I know how to determine what level of reality I'm experiencing. What is the realness of my experience? The feeling is the only gauge that I know of. I don't know of any other. So now let me go back to your question about what is dimension, because I never really answered it. We talked about atoms as vortexes, the atomic vortexes. We talked about subatomic particles actually just being different resonances and interactions between atomic vortexes that are kind of unraveling. And there's part of this explanation that I don't understand yet. So this is going to kind of be a cop-out answer or an incomplete answer because I'm getting intuitive hits from my right brain, from my intuition, that my left brain is not understanding yet. And so this is kind of the journey that all of us go through in meditation and in developing our intuitive skills and marrying or bringing together the left and right brains. And so I'm going to have to go and study more about the electromagnetic spectrum and the different phases of matter and the true nature of electricity and gravity and all of these types of things to explain clearly everything that's contained energetically in this vibratory realm called the third dimension, and what is a dimension, and what is the fourth dimension, what is the second dimension. And so this is kind of the journey that every meditator and yogi and monk and every light worker and psychic has been on. This is part of the journey of evolution. And I believe it is important to bring together the right and left brains. And some light workers and psychics and also meditators and yogis, and they get very involved in their own belief system or their own interpretation of reality. And they kind of forget about science and logic and reason, and they just kind of go off into fantasy land, and they never bring the two together. And this is a mistake. And it is hard to bring the two realms together. It is very difficult sometimes. It's very easy to, for example, read something like the Hopi blue Kachina star prophecy and say, well, this is just, a metaphorical prophecy or a metaphorical description through prophecy of the cycle of cataclysms that occur on the earth. But in the last several months, I've been studying many, many things about astronomy, about different stars, while I was trying to figure out if the zodiac that we currently use and the precession of the equinoxes calendar and how it relates to the Hindu yugas, the ages of time in Hinduism, if those interpretations that are being used out there are really correct. I was trying to figure out how the zodiac has been manipulated, if it has been manipulated. What yuga are we really in? What are the correct dates? And all of this, and it's very hard work to try to meditate on all of this and to bring all of the intuitive meditative visions and insights together with an actual calendar and the actual course of history, recorded history and what happened in history, and to relate all those things. It's hard work, just like working on the pain body is very difficult work. And so I just mention this because a lot of very spiritually aware and gifted people that I see out there in the world are making the mistake of not working on their dark sides and not bringing together the right and left brains, not bringing together the realm of meditation and intuition with science and logic and reason. And we've got to do that if we really want to evolve all parts of ourselves. So, for example, the Hopi blue Kachina star prophecy, I figured out, is talking about the cyclic disaster that is caused by Sirius, which is our companion star. We're in a trinary star system with Sirius A and B. The Sirius system and our sun have a 24,000-year orbit around each other, around the common point of gravity. And right now we're accelerating towards Sirius, and then when we reach the closest point with Sirius, then the two Oort clouds, which is where all the comets are, chunks of ice floating way out in space beyond the planets, will rub together and displace thousands of comets, which will make the next 1,000 years or so after the closest pass with Sirius kind of a heavy comet season in our solar system. And our chance of getting hit with a comet goes way up. And so this is the real meaning of that Hopi prophecy about the blue Kachina star. And a comet hit, according to the geological evidence that's currently available, a comet hit the North Pole area about 10,500 BC or so. The last closest pass with Sirius was about 1,000 years before that, which occurs at the high point of the Golden Age. And so after we reach the high point of the Golden Age, then comes the time of testing, to see if we're really enlightened or not. I suppose that's one way you could look at it. And so we did get hit. We don't get hit every time. If you look at the Vostok ice core, Vostok is, I believe, a Russian research station in Antarctica, and they've drilled an ice core out of the Antarctic ice, I think like 2 kilometers or 2 miles down. I can't remember if it's in kilometers or miles. But the ice core record goes back quite a number of years. And so if you look at the levels of dust in the ice core and the Vostok ice core records, you can kind of see a pattern of being hit by a comet every 24,000 years or so. And it doesn't always exactly follow that cycle, but it's pretty close. And so that's just one piece of evidence that this theory may be correct. And, this comet hit is what killed off all of the woolly mammoths. It killed off all of the big animals, the big mega animals, the megafauna as they call them. in the northern hemisphere. The big animals in Africa were spared because Africa is far enough south to avoid that extinction event. And it also extinguished the Clovis Indian civilization in New Mexico and in other areas. And so mankind was kind of reset back to the Stone Age. And even though we regrouped and we had a fantastic tribal culture during the latter part of the Golden Age for a long time, eventually our consciousness fell. And then during the Dwapara Yuga, that's when the reptilians were once again able to start to deceive us into their kind of society. And that started in Iraq, which is ancient Sumer. So anyway, I've gone off on a tangent again, but I just wanted to give an example of what bringing together the right and left brains can do. It's really hard work. It's kind of annoying and frustrating at times. But this is something that I've been able to figure out that I feel is a pretty plausible theory. And if the truth of this is ever figured out, it'll probably be past my own lifetime. But I'll be looking down from home after I die this time. I think I'm going to take a vacation and not come back for a little while, honestly. But I don't know. We'll see. But I bet you that this theory is correct. And so many other people have been able to bring together their right and left brains, the intuitive and logical realms, and reap great rewards from it. And so this is a similar process as working on your pain body, really. We can't just do the easy spiritual work. We've got to do the hard stuff as well. We can't just go meditate and seek the bliss state all the time. And anything negative, we just try to push away from us and say, oh, I don't want to go into the dark side. Well, the dark side is energy that is part of you that is not going anywhere. And it's going to be there until you give it its due time and attention in your own consciousness, and you let it come forth and express itself. And you can either do that in meditation or in lifetimes where the dark volcano finally explodes because you've been ignoring it for so long and you become a Hitler in that life. It's going to come out one way or the other. And it's your own choice about how that happens. And I think the only way for humanity to avoid extinguishing itself and also to avoid coming back under the influence of the reptilian agenda during the next descending Dwapara Yuga, which is a long time away. It's 24,000 years away or more, actually, at this point. It's a long time away. But we're going to ascend into the Golden Age during the next several thousand years. And then we might get hit with another comet 1,000 years or so after the peak of the Golden Age. And I'm writing a blog article with the ages of time and the yugas and the zodiac, the new zodiac thing that I'm going to propose on my blog, ascendingspirit.us. And so if you feel like visiting that site, and it'll show when the next high point of the Satya Yuga is supposed to be, according to my own opinion about it. But after that, we may get hit with a comet and then get wiped back into the Stone Age and then fall once again under the reptilian agenda like we did the last time. And so if we're going to avoid that, and if we're going to avoid extinguishing ourselves, or at least avoid the death of most of the humans on the planet, talking about a population reduction of 95% or more, if we want to avoid that, I feel we've got to bring together the intuitive and logical realms. We've got to marry the two. We can't be one or the other. We have to be masters of both. We have to be masters of balance. The answers are never in one perspective or the other. The answers are always at the 0 point, the point of balance. And I think that holds true for every issue on the planet. I just watched a video about a man complaining about women in general. That was quite funny on Facebook, and quite true, actually. And I've watched many videos in the past about women complaining about men and how they're so abusive and how they've been beaten up and all of this. And I find those videos to be very true. I can see both perspectives. And so the answer to the tension or disagreements between the two genders that we have in the human species is not to favor women and blame the men, or not to favor men and blame the women and treat them as the lesser gender. No, the solution is at the 0 point, at the point of balance. Same for the race issues, the racial issues. Same for the cultural issues. We have to reach a very mature point of balance in ourselves. So anyway, I am going to struggle and continue to work on myself and try to come up with a better or a more complete explanation of what a dimension is. But I'll just give you my current incomplete understanding. So the lowest state of matter in the 3D realm is probably the solid state. But if you start to heat up a solid, then eventually it's going to turn into liquid. And if you continue to heat it, it's eventually going to turn into gas. And if you continue to heat that, it'll eventually turn into plasma. And I think plasma is the hottest state and the highest frequency state of matter that exists in the third dimension, where the atomic vortex, where the atoms are vibrating in a very, very fast, in a very high frequency, in a very fast emotion, when they're in their most excited state, as they're called in science. That is the state of plasma. And so, as far as I know, in modern science, it's not possible to achieve a higher state, a more excited state, a higher frequency state of matter than the plasma state. So let's just call the plasma state as the highest frequency state of matter, meaning that the atoms in that matter are vibrating at the fastest possible rate. It's not possible, as far as I know, to build a device which excites the atoms to a state that is beyond the plasma state. However, let's say that we're writing a sci-fi novel and we have a device, we have a multi-dimensional device that can excite atoms beyond the state of plasma and raise their frequency even more. What would happen is that the atoms would disappear from view because they would be crossing the dimensional barrier and going into the fourth dimension. And so this is what I mean by a dimension as a frequency range. Everything in this dimension, the third dimension that we're in, every atom is oscillating at a particular frequency. And from all the different kinds of atoms and states of matter that we have in this dimension, we can come up with the frequency range. We can come up with a low end and a high end. And that is the frequency range of the third dimension, at least for physical matter. There are other types of energies that exist in the third dimension that spiritual people tend to call astral energies. And I don't quite yet know how to relate those descriptions and experiences of astral energies and astral states into the left brain to come up with a logical explanation for those. But I'm going to work on that. And a lot of people think that astral experiences and astral beings and so on are fourth dimensional experiences. And I used to think that too. But actually, I've concluded that that's not the case, that they're third dimensional experiences. And that a dimension is far larger than we think it is. That the physical part of the third dimension is actually a rather small part of the third dimension. And that there is a whole non-physical part to the third dimension, like a whole non-physical universe out there that is part of the third dimension that we don't yet know much about. And this might be the part of the universe that physicists refer to as dark matter. Because if you look at the amount of matter that is observable in the universe right now, it's not enough matter to explain motions of solar systems and galaxies. It's not enough matter to hold the universe together. I don't remember the percentage, but it's only a small percent of the total amount of matter that you would need to hold the universe together based on our current understanding of gravity. So the physical part of the third dimension is only a small part. It's maybe, I would say, 20%. That's what my intuition says. And spiritual people have been talking about ascending to the fourth and fifth dimension and all of this. Like we're going to physically turn into light and all of this stuff. I've decided that's a fairy tale. That's a spiritual toddler's understanding of reality. And as we start to spiritually wake up out of the dark age, we are spiritual toddlers. We're spiritual children. We don't have a real depth of understanding yet. We don't have a mature understanding of these topics yet. So when people talk about ascending to the fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh dimensions, what they're actually talking about is activating their higher chakras that can receive higher frequencies in this third dimension. And every dimension has multiple layers, and every chakra is tuned to a particular layer of that dimension. And the different layers in different dimensions relate to each other. And so this is the way that different dimensions communicate, basically, or interact with each other. The seventh layer, for example, in the third dimension relates to the seventh layer in the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension, etc. So it's kind of like octaves. So an E note in one octave relates to the E note the next octave up. That's basically what dimensions are like. And I don't know if the frequencies between the dimensions work exactly the same way as the frequencies between different notes, or different octaves, rather. I haven't worked that part out yet in my own consciousness. Some spiritual philosophers have said that this is the case, but I have to see it for myself and reach my own understanding. But basically, it is impossible for any being in whatever dimension that they are in to create a device that will project an energy of some kind, or an object of some kind, or themselves, a being of some kind, into another dimension, which means that we cannot cross the dimensional barrier. It's impossible. And this is part of the divine design, because different dimensions are not meant to interfere with each other. And so this idea that the reptilians, for example, the Nibiruans, are fourth dimensional beings preying on our astral energy, and they feed off of our anger and fear, and that's why they're having a negative agenda of control on this planet. That idea, I've decided, is a fairy tale. I used to think that was probably the case based on what I was channeling, but the more I looked into what I was channeling, the more subjective it became. And I realized I was channeling through my own filter of karma, and that some of what I channeled was accurate, and some of what I channeled was definitely not accurate. Sometimes it was completely, utterly wrong. And so this is what led me into meditation, because I got tired of channeling a bunch of stuff that was totally incorrect. I got tired of a limited understanding. However, there is something that can cross all of the dimensional barriers, and that is our own consciousness. Because our consciousness is actually not an object or an energy that is encapsulated by this universe. Our consciousness is being projected into this universe by our own soul. It's a projection. It is not something that is encapsulated within this universe. So our consciousness transects all of the dimensions. We exist simultaneously in all of the dimensions. We perceive time vastly differently in all of the dimensions. So 1 second to a ninth dimensional being, for example, could be hundreds of years to a third dimensional being. And I don't know if that's the right ratio. I'm just giving an example. I haven't worked out the ratios yet. And as far as I'm aware, there are 12 dimensions. And we are working on a 13th dimension and a 0th dimension. So we're expanding the universe on both sides, 1 dimension up and 1 dimension down. And the final number of dimensions will be 16. I was told that the number of the divine matrix is 64, and that we have 16 dimensions when the universe is complete in its evolution. We'll have 16 dimensions, and we'll have, and we already have, since the beginning of this universe, 4 modes of learning. And that's a whole nother tangent that I won't get off on right now, but this creates a matrix of 16 by 4, which is 64, basically. So anyway, all of this is higher dimensional knowledge that is really not relevant at all to the human journey. And knowing all this information hasn't done me a bit of good in getting over any of my emotional stuff. So a lot of people want to understand all of the answers, but then they get in a fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and then they just totally fall apart and fall into depression and anger and guilt and all this stuff. So, I'm not really motivated to talk about all of the higher dimensional knowledge that much, because it doesn't really help people that much. Working on your pain body is what actually improves your life. Doing the hard work of working on your darkness, on your pain, on your grief, on your sorrow, on your anger, on your jealousy and rage and heartbreak and feelings of betrayal and frustration and all of this stuff. Doing the hard work is what actually improves one's life. Now, that's not to say that the work that the Lightworkers and star beings are doing on this planet is not valuable. It is very valuable, because they are the first wave of beings that are waking up the whole planet to the coming age of light. Because in order to work on our pain body, on our dark side, we have to do so from the perspective of an enlightened state. So the Lightworkers and star beings have brought the first step to us in waking up and realizing that we are immortal, multidimensional beings of light. And so from my perspective, working on your pain body, on your dark side, is the second step. So I'm bringing the second step to the table. I'm one of the beings being guided by Spirit to bring the second step to the table. Because the Lightworkers and star beings out there so far have not come together and built the new world together. They've not come together and built all of the wonderful, enlightened communities that they want to build. And me and my friend Stuart tried a community project several years ago and failed. And I've spent years working on myself, preparing myself to restart that project in a different way. But I'm not going to do so until Spirit tells me that it's time. Because otherwise I'm just banging my head against the wall and I'm just repeating the same lessons over and over again. The Lightworkers and star beings that come together in communities are still not able to realize their whole dream. You know, there's the hippie commune scene where they build kind of a shanty town and everybody sits around and smokes dope all the time and gets high. And they sit around and talk and talk and talk, but nothing ever really gets done. And then there's more practical Lightworker communities that come together, but people can't get along and they can't get past their boundaries, their comfort zones enough to even be part of what they really want to be part of in those communities. And those communities end up just kind of falling apart over a period of time because people get stressed out. And even though they are going around saying when they're in Lightworker mode that they're all about love and light and they want to be in a compassionate community where everybody shares everything with everybody, the reality is that they cannot maintain that frequency all the time. And the reason they can't is because the darkness in their subconscious is being ignored, and it ends up banging down the doors of their conscious mind and then creating all of these problems in their life. It creates all of the stresses, it creates all of the misunderstandings, and it manifests darkness. You know, that's darkness's job, is to manifest darkness. That's the nature of it, so you can't really blame it if you haven't worked on it. It's kind of like if you go to the gym every day and you just work on your pecs and you just do bench press and maybe biceps and triceps, and then you go to the gym one day and everybody's doing squats, and of course you want to fit in and you want to join the club, so you try to squat 500 pounds like everybody else, and you end up breaking your knees and you can't walk anymore, you know. So all of us light workers and channels and psychics and star beings and so on, we're running around saying that we want to be in community and build the new world and all of this, but we haven't resolved our own darkness. And I used to be in that group, so I'm speaking from experience here. Stuart and I tried to start our community, and what it did is it created the perfect storm of a situation to reveal to us all of our weakest points. And after a year and a half of that, I said, okay, enough, you know, and everybody else had left by that time anyway, and Stuart had gotten sick, and unfortunately he passed away several months later. And I got sick the same month that he died, and I had to have a physical reckoning of my own. And so I sat down after that and I said, okay, yeah, obviously this is not working. And so I'm just going to sit down and meditate for 8 hours a day until I'm internally ready to manifest what I want to manifest in my life. Because otherwise I'm just banging my head against the wall. So that was really the decision that started me on my current meditative journey.